All right, Steeler fans, it is Monday, which means it's time for the Monday morning conversation. It seems like I have this guy on multiple times a year because I love talking to him. He's a good friend of mine. Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette joins us. What's up, Chris? How's it going?
What's up, Jeff? How you been, man?
I've been great. Probably better than the Steelers are when you consider their fluctuation in the quarterback position. No one knows what's going to happen, and that's what I want to talk about today. This podcast, this segment's all about the Steelers' options. I think it's time to talk about the Steelers' options, not where they're going to go, but the options that they have. Now, Kenny Pickett's the only quarterback on the roster right now. Mitch Trubisky's gone. Mason Rudolph's a free agent. You can say what you want about speculation there, but I want to start with free agency. Chris, I want to pick your brain about some of the quarterbacks that are going to be free agents. And I say going to be because we assume like Russell Wilson will be released.
Yeah.
Therefore, he would be on the open market. We all know what Mason Rudolph brings. Steelers say what they're going to say about the position. What about you? What do you think about these free agent options out there? We're talking Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill. I've mentioned Russell Wilson, Jacoby Brissett. You could go down the list, but those are pretty much the high-profile names. Anyone stick out to you that you would like, you know what, I'd love to see them bring this guy in?
I think Ryan Tannehill is an interesting option purely for the idea of him being like the third option on the team who's been in Arthur Smith's system and can help Kenny Pickett and whoever else the other quarterback is, as far as going through training camp and then like in an emergency situation, which, hey, we've seen the Steelers need at quarterback a few times over the past several years. I think he makes a lot of sense for that. But like, I'm not on board for getting Kirk Cousins is going to require a lot of money. Tannehill won't. Like Tannehill, you could probably pay a Mason Rudolph-like contract to, and he'll be fine, and he'll join the team. Jacoby Brissett, I think he's a solid veteran who could be a backup or like a placeholder if you don't like what Kenny Pickett brings. I think the biggest option the Steelers have right now that they need to lock down is bringing back Mason Rudolph just to have that security blanket of if Kenny Pickett does not make any progress next year, you at least have the guy that made your offense work a little bit at the end of last season. But I mean, you look at this free agency group here, including Russell Wilson, I don't see anything that you're going to not have to overpay for. And the Steelers, I just don't think they're in a good position right now to overpay for a quarterback when they're trying to fix multiple other positions as well. They're going to need another cornerback, whether that's in the draft or in free agency. They might need to add at linebacker if they're not sure about the injury situation for those guys. I think defensive line's a group they need to look at. Offensive line's an obvious one. They have several questions I think that they need answered. And if you are spending big on a free agent quarterback that you're not sure is, how they're going to mesh with the Steelers, that's going to be tough. And, signing a guy in free agency, including Russell Wilson, who I liked in his time in Seattle, but I wouldn't put a lot of money down to get a Russell Wilson with the way that things have gone in Denver. I just think that you're spending money on something that isn't going to give you that much of an upgrade in the first place. Like, I get the people that are like, hey, Kenny Pickett hasn't been good enough to be, just the starting quarterback, and, just resigning to him and Mason Rudolph seems like a death sentence. But like, the team has been 19-6 when those two guys have started in the last 2 years, and 19-6 proportionally is like a 13-win season. So right. in a 17-game year or 17-game season. So like, that's a pretty good rate that you can work with either of those guys for now. And if you're spending so much to just get another person that's going to be the equivalent of that, or maybe at best a slight upgrade temporarily, I think you're throwing away the opportunity to bring in someone who's going to be a core piece for the next 4 to 5 years that you can do in free agency with some of the other positions available. Cornerback. I think there's going to be some really interesting players who they could look at, whether, everyone's going to talk about L'Jarius Sneed and Jalen Johnson, and both of those would be great. But, the idea of maybe getting a Kendall Fuller, a guy that's in his late 20s who could be a good veteran for the next few years, someone that can just pair well moving forward with Joey Porter Jr. I think those are moves that make a lot of sense for what the Steelers are trying to do right now. Whereas, if there was a free agent quarterback out there right now that was in his prime and was top market, that'd be different. But those rarely happen, and when they do, there's usually a reason why that's happening, a la Deshaun Watson.
Right. So you're saying stay the cheaper route. Now, my question for you is, would Mason Rudolph, if you were Mason Rudolph, let me phrase it this way, would you want to come back to Pittsburgh?
That's a good question. And that's one that I've been asking, all throughout, even before the offseason. When he had that first good game against the Bengals, I'm like, someone's going to look at this and think, can I reform Mason Rudolph for a couple years and make him my quarterback, my QB1 for a couple years? And if you're Mason Rudolph and someone gives you the opportunity, you go running to it. You're like, you know what? Get me to a place that will just make me a starter and let me show what I have to offer to the NFL. But also, if you're Mason Rudolph, you might think, you know what? Like, yeah, sure. Right as soon as Ben Roethlisberger retired, this team signed and drafted a quarterback in the first round and, relegated me to third string. And you could say that, well, the Steelers didn't, give him a real chance. Well, I watched a lot of practices in training camp, and the Steelers gave him chances. He just Mason Rudolph wasn't being the guy in a lot of those practices. Like there was very much a good reason why he was the third string quarterback, in a lot of after looking at a lot of those practices. But the thing about that I've always admired about Mason Rudolph is that guy, exhibited class the whole way through it. Like he never complained publicly. He never whined about it. He never said, woe is me. He stuck with it. And he came up for the team that believed in him. And so if I'm Mason Rudolph, I might be thinking like, look, do I wish that things could have gone a little bit better for me here? Yeah, sure. But you know what? I also got benched for Devlin Hodges at one point in my career here, and they didn't completely run away from me. They didn't cut me and send me off somewhere else. Maybe I do think that. I also wonder what kind of contract offer he'll get because, Jeff, you've been watching the NFL for a long time like I have. You remember guys like Matt Flynn, the guy that was a backup for like a year for like the Packers, and the Seahawks gave him a super contract. And like sometimes teams will get desperate like that. And if he gets that kind of offer, he'll go away. But if he doesn't, and the Steelers are offering a similar amount of money as everyone else, I think he might come back here, especially if they just have Kenny Pickett as his competition, because he's like, you know what? I was better than that guy at the end of last season. I could win that. And that might be the one thing that keeps him around is if no one gives him a big deal and the Steelers don't go get another major name at quarterback.
Not to mention Kenny Pickett has yet to prove he can stay healthy. So even if you don't win that job, there's a good chance based on what we've seen the first 2 years of Kenny Pickett's career that he would get a job. He would get a spot in terms of, hey, he's out for 5 weeks. He's out for 4 weeks. I'm going to show what I can do. I've done it before. I'll do it again. So it's very interesting. Let's go to the option a lot of people love to talk about because it is purely speculation, but it is trade. Would the Steelers be willing to trade? Everyone's heard the Justin Fields crap. Like everyone's talked about that, but there are some other options out there. Again, focusing on the Mike Tomlin postseason press conference when he said that Kenny Pickett's going to have competition. Doesn't mean that they're going to go out and sign a player that they believe is going to come in and be QB1 right away. So you have like Justin Fields. We know about that. Everyone's talked about it. But then there's someone else that's intriguing. There's some other players that are intriguing for multiple reasons. You have like a Trey Lance. He was discarded by the 49ers. He goes to Dallas. Dallas really they're going to keep Dak Prescott. Maybe Trey Lance, you can get him on the cheap. I don't know if the Steelers even want him. A lot of people have strong opinions. I don't, but he's a name. Geno Smith out in Seattle. Is he going to be back with the new regime out there in Seattle? Would he be a guy that would want to come in and compete? I don't know. And then there's the name I don't like, but some people are already tossing it around as Mac Jones. First-round talent in New England has supposedly worn out his welcome there. I don't have any interest in that, but that's a name that's being discussed nationally, not locally. If I'm forgetting someone that you might think fits this criteria, by all means, let me know. But what do you think about the possibility of a trade and the Steelers at the quarterback position?
Any trade the Steelers make a quarterback this year, I think, unless someone like is doing something stupid, like if the Chargers are giving away Justin Herbert, which is never going to happen. Like I'm saying, in the realm of reality, the Steelers are only giving up day 3 picks for a quarterback because no one's giving away a quarterback that's worth that level of higher picks in my opinion. And so, a Trey Lance is interesting because he's 24 years old. He's had some NFL experience. You could bring him in and it wouldn't be like, he wouldn't be guaranteed anything. It would just be like, hey, you're the young guy. Let's just, let's see how you do. And if he excels in camp, great. If not, oh, well, like that's where it is. But again, that's where when you can stomach an trade if it's a day 3 pick or a swap of picks or something that is equivalent to not losing in your first, second, or third round pick this upcoming season. Like that's where I'm sitting there and saying like, okay, that's where the Steelers need to make a move. And I'm kind of with you on some of the other guys. Like I'm not big on just throwing money around for like a guy like Mac Jones. Like, he's 26. Mac Jones is very much along the lines of where of like a further Kenny Pickett, where he's probably done even worse as far as his record. So I look at this and I think that if you could get a Trevor Lance or a Trey Lance for a low round pick, sure, go for that. Even if like that's fine. I know everyone wants to talk about Justin Fields, but like the reason I'd be in on Justin Fields if he had at least 2 years left on that deal. But the fact that he has 1 year left, and if the Steelers trade for him, you basically have to give him his 5th year extension, because let's say Justin Fields is all that and you didn't give him his 5th year extension, then he hits free agency the year after and there's nothing you can do and he gets the biggest payday. And then you can say, well, we found the quarterback that we wanted for a year. But then if you commit to that 5th, so you sign it, you trade for him, you give up a pick that's going to be higher than a day 3 pick for him, and you get that 1 year rental, you tack on another year, that's $20 million in 2025 that you're committing to him. And you don't know if he is the guy yet. And that's the gamble there that I don't think is the juice is worth the squeeze there. And why, like, if the Bears are willing to just give up Justin Fields for not that much because they want to move on with to Caleb Williams and they have no better routes, fine, great, dandy. But I'm not giving up a first, second, or third rounder for that guy either. And that's the peculiar situation the Steelers are in. It's like, I don't think that they're in a position to draft a quarterback that would be the franchise guy this year, or to trade for / sign a quarterback that would take that role this year.
It's funny. I think if Justin Fields played for any other team in the NFL, that there's a possibility that maybe the Steelers could manage something that's not going to, they're not going to see all those day 1, day 2 picks, like you mentioned, leave, but it's the Bears. And the Bears already got fleeced by Pittsburgh. And don't think for a second when they were they were the laughing stock of the league when they traded a 2nd round pick for Chase Claypool. And Omar Khan is just probably sitting back in his chair, like, laughing. And they're like, we're not doing this again. Not with that team. Not after what happened last year. No way, no chance in hell. I don't see Justin Fields happening unless the Steelers suddenly take this huge shift in organizational thought and say, let's just throw caution into the wind and let's see what the hell we do. But if they get the 5th year option, then you have to think too, there's a ripple effect here. What happens with Najee Harris? Are you going to pay for 2 players 5th year options in 2024? Probably not. Spot. They didn't do that when you talked about the 5th year option when Minkah Fitzpatrick came up. They chose his, and obviously they only wanted to pay 1 guaranteed 5th year option. Would be interesting. But then let's go to, I think, what is really interesting and intriguing for me, and that's the draft. And it's the draft. And the reason being is that most people, not me, I'm not a draft guru or someone that follows the draft extremely close, but most would say this is a pretty decent class. Some would also say it's a very top-heavy class. So let's immediately get rid of the Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. Like, they're not going to be there. This would have to trade so much. So then you have this middle rung of quarterbacks like the Michael Penix Jr., who, boy, you talk about, I've heard everything from he's a middle 1st round pick to maybe he's a middle 2nd to almost end of 2nd pick, 2nd round. Bo Nix, people are comparing him to Kenny Pickett because of his age and all that stuff. He's a redshirt senior. J.J. McCarthy, no one knows what to think about the product from Michigan. Then you get into the late round guys, middle to late round. Your Michael Pratt, your Joe Milton, Sam Hartman, even Spencer Rattler out of South Carolina. This is where the Steelers are going to live, though, right? If they are going to choose to draft a quarterback, it's going to be a mid to late round draft selection. It's not going to be a high pick. They have too many other team needs. You've mentioned some of those already at inside linebacker, cornerback, tackle, center. We've gone over these a million times. So, Chris, what do you think about this draft class and this group of quarterback in particular when you're talking about these prospects that could potentially be available for Pittsburgh?
Look, I'm right with you. Like, Michael Penix, I like the jib of Michael Penix. Like, I like the way that he played in college. I loved him at Indiana. I loved him at Washington. But the thing is, that man has too much of an injury history, and he's basically Kenny Pickett's size. And you can have an injury history, but if you're Kenny Pickett's size with that injury history, and again, like, he was out for the season for like 3 or 4 years in his college career, that's something that gives me a red flag. And if you can even go back to the national championship game, which, he earned his way into, he played great in the playoffs, but when you saw him playing and you saw the way he was getting hit and just how he was like holding his sides together, just that's a rough spot to be in. And like, you see that, like, if you put him in the NFL, like, he's getting hit by college guys like that, like, Michigan, if he goes up against NFL guys and he's taking those type of hits, I have a hard problem selling that to myself as far as being a guy. Bo Nix, I mean, I feel like you're getting a retread of Kenny Pickett, and like you can take the shot if you want, but I think you're going to get the same sort of thing there. I also am not like done with Kenny Pickett. Like, this guy has a winning record as a quarterback and has flashed at times and shown potential in an offense that wasn't working for the most part, and only got a game and a half without Matt Canada at the end of this past season. And so, like, Mason Rudolph got the benefit from, over time, like the Steelers started to figure out some things, when Mitch Trubisky was in at quarterback and they said, hey, let's try these things. And then, he executed in those moments, and Mason Rudolph deserves credit for that. But I think the Steelers have every reason to say, hey, Kenny Pickett, let's give that another shot. Now, still bring in competition. Don't just be sold on Kenny. Like, you're not banking on Kenny Pickett being the answer, but keeping an option there. As far as other guys in this draft, I'm not big on Michael Pratt out of Tulane. Spencer Rattler's interesting because I think he has potential, but I haven't liked his demeanor when I've seen him, just in his college years. I think that he's he can be very high and very low. And then when you get to like the lower level guys, like, Joe Milton, big, fast guy with a big arm, but like never really put it together at Tennessee. Guys like Talia Tagovailoa, like you're bringing in guys to be the third stringer, to be the young guy that just kind of is there.
Let me interject here for a second, because you're
Sure.
you're moving ahead quick, and I appreciate where you're going. We're going to go there, but I want to ask you now, like, the Steelers have to fill out their quarterback depth chart. Like, I mean, let's go back to the beginning of the segment. They have one guy on their quarterback depth chart. So I'm looking at these draft prospects, and like I said, you follow closer than I do. Even if this is they've signed a free agent, they have Kenny Pickett, they need to fill out the depth chart. I'm not saying a Chris Oladokun 7th round pick, which is what he was, but someone of that, like Sam Hartman is a name that comes up. He's an older guy. A lot of these quarterbacks are old because they stayed in college longer, whether that's due to NIL, whatever, doesn't matter why, but they're older quarterbacks. Are there any of these players you could say, hey, this could be a Steelers 6th round, 7th round pick that they're just looking to bring in as a QB3, someone they could play? Like you say, Joe Milton, he's an athlete. He's an athlete. Maybe that's someone that's intriguing to them as someone that brings a different skill set. Is there anyone that fits that criteria for you in this draft?
I mean, Joe Milton's one of those guys. If he's around in like the 5th round, sure, like go for that.
Right.
Like that works for me, because like, again, like the other thing is about when you're thinking of your third quarterback here, you're thinking of what roles they play. Joe Milton can absolutely be your practice squad guy who simulates the athletic quarterback that you got to face a lot in today's NFL. So like a guy like him makes sense. I've seen some good things of Sam Hartman at times. I've also seen Sam Hartman get utterly abused, and I'm kind of sold on him.
No relation, by the way. No relation.
I never even think about that. That's funny. But yeah, like I saw that man crumble at the ACC championship when he faced Kenny Pickett and those Pitt Panthers, when he was just getting hit left and right and just kind of go away. I think that if you're getting a guy like that, if Rattler or Milton or like even like Jordan Travis is one of those guys we're just around in midday 3, good, that makes a lot. I think that makes the most sense for the Steelers, because I think that right now your best option is keeping Kenny Pickett around, signing a veteran, whether that's Mason Rudolph or someone else, that doesn't cost you a whole bunch of money, and then drafting a young quarterback to have someone in the works that, like, hey, if they click, great. If not, you spend a day 3 pick on a quarterback that can kind of fill out your room and be young, and then be there for if Kenny Pickett's not the answer. Well, you have this other young quarterback that you've been developing to at least be a system quarterback. That's what the Steelers, I think, are looking at right now. Is they're a team that's going to need a system type quarterback, a game manager type quarterback moving forward until they find that next ace. But again, we've seen game manager type quarterbacks do very well for teams. That's what Brock Purdy, almost won a Super Bowl for the Niners doing that. So I don't think that is a death knell to the Steelers' hopes as long as they find the guy that can be efficient in their new offense.
All right, so let's put our prognosticator hat on now.
Sure.
And I want you to think to yourself, again, the Steelers like to carry 4 quarterbacks into training camp. It's just the way they've always done it. Could they only go with 3? They could. But I want you to predict. We know Kenny Pickett's going to be back. This is not a prediction of who's going to start week 1. This is just, how do you predict the Steelers filling out their depth chart And if you have names, that's fantastic. And then I'll tell you what I'm thinking and see if we jive together. Go ahead.
I think the Steelers, they try to go out and get Mason Rudolph to come back. If he does, they bring him in.
You think he will? You think he will?
I think that Mason Rudolph will give it a shot. I just don't. I think Mason Rudolph is interested in coming back. I just don't know what other teams will offer for him.
True.
And like, if another team comes in and offers him, $10 million, see ya, he's gone. But if I think if Mason Rudolph's looking at a $5 million contract with the Steelers or with, the Panthers, I think he'd take the Steelers. I think that would be a situation where he'd be like, you know what, I can work with here. I have a relationship with these guys. Mike Tomlin stuck up for me when, people were accusing me of saying things at Myles Garrett. Like, there's things there that I can see stand there. So I'd say they try to get Mason Rudolph. I think that they do sign a veteran quarterback, whether that's Jacoby Brissett or Ryan Tannehill or someone along those lines with Mason Rudolph. And then after that, they either add a day 3 pick or an undrafted quarterback from this class that they go into this NFL year, this next NFL season with Kenny Pickett, 2 veterans who have NFL experience and a young player. And if they don't get that free agent right away in free agency, they might go back and see who's still available among older quarterbacks, kick some tires and say, okay, you're the 4th guy coming into camp. We're going to put you up against to see how you help things move along and if you can beat out the rookie that we drafted. I think that's along the lines that they're going here.
I definitely think, you have Kenny Pickett. I think their 1A option in free agency is Mason Rudolph.
Mm-hmm.
If he goes elsewhere, like you said, gets a big contract offer, maybe more years than what the Steelers are willing to offer, who knows, then maybe Ryan Tannehill is their 1B. I don't see trade as being an option right now. I do agree with you, though. I think they double dip and add 2 free agent quarterbacks. And I'll say a name that people will roll their eyes and laugh. I could see Joshua Dobbs coming back. I really could.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
It does make a lot of sense because really he's a really smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to know that his role is probably QB3, no matter who else is in the quarterback depth chart. And he could be that 3rd option, break glass if emergency. You can win some games with Joshua Dobbs. Now, we've seen it in time and time again in the NFL. Is he going to be your week in, week out starter and be successful? No. I call him like a spark plug. He's good for a little bit. He's gonna flame out. That people are going to catch up to him. But he would be a great addition for a young quarterback, even if it's Kenny Pickett, to help him. He helped Ben Roethlisberger on the sidelines during his time when Roethlisberger was still there. And I agree with you. I think that they could maybe get you're talking about a Sam Hartman if it was late in the draft, day 3. Okay, let's bring this guy in and see what we can. If he doesn't pan out, he doesn't pan out. It's not like it's a round 1 pick. So I think we're very much seeing it the same way. And unfortunately, what I'm going to agree with you 100% is that I don't think, but man, Kenny gets so damn polarizing. It's annoying sometimes, but has he gotten an opportunity to show what he can do without Kenny Pickett without Matt Canada? And the answer to that is no. You may hate Kenny Pickett more than anything else in the sports world, but you cannot say in a realistic lens that he's been given every opportunity to prove what he can do without that offensive coordinator. And so the Steelers, you probably agree with me, Chris, they're going to give him a shot, right?
Yeah, they're going to give him a shot. And they deserve it to themselves to give it. Giving up on a quarterback after 2 years, there's a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL that wouldn't have made it if you gave up on them after 2 years. And again, it'd be different if he was in an offensive system. Like the Steelers, for everyone looking at just the quarterback play is something that's dipped after Ben Roethlisberger's left. Look at what happened to the Steelers offense that they had built in the late 2010s. Le'Veon Bell just disappears. Antonio Brown goes crazy. Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro both retire long before they were expected to, because they were expected to be this was supposed to be their swan song year. Like 2023 was supposed to be the year that Pouncey and DeCastro aged out of their careers. They ended early, because of injuries, and they were part of what was going to be the nucleus that kind of carried over until they needed to get a new offensive line. So that's part of why the offensive line has been bad the past few years, is because they could not just up and replace an all-pro center and an all-pro guard like that. And so they're trying to rebuild their offensive line in different ways. And, while you're doing that, while addressing other positions, like edge rusher, like cornerback, like running back and things like that, your offensive line, sometimes you have to take later investments, riskier investments on offensive line that don't always work, like, Kendrick Green. And so that's where I think that Kenny Pickett is in the middle of, is that this was an offense that, not beyond even just the coordinator situation, like this offense had to fix a lot. It had to rediscover what it would make it good again in competitive situations, and what would be something that could make them an offense that could drop 30 on a bad team, because the Steelers couldn't do that even in some of in the last year with Ben Roethlisberger sometimes. So like, that's where I think that if the Steelers are being honest with themselves, they're giving Kenny Pickett a chance in this new offensive scheme that Arthur Smith's going to create. Again, Arthur Smith turned Ryan Tannehill into a Pro Bowler in 2019. Derrick Henry went from not having great numbers his first 3 years to having the 2 best years of his life while Arthur Smith was his offensive coordinator. The Steelers, I think, are in a position where if they pick right at offensive line, they add a good center, a good tackle, with the guys that they already have, they could be in a position to be one of the better offensive lines in the NFL, which could give them one of the better running games in the NFL, which will make it easier to set up the passing game for Kenny Pickett, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, and Pat Freiermuth. So the pieces are there for Kenny Pickett to just be a game manager quarterback. And if they can get that out of him, that's all they really need, which I don't think is unfeasible I do think is feasible for Kenny Pickett.
It's great stuff, Chris. I do appreciate your time as always. Why don't you go ahead and plug what you're doing for both the Locked On Steelers podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette?
As always, you can find me at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. I talk Steelers, Pitt football, Pitt basketball, all things there. On the North Shore Drive podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You can read all our work at post-gazette.com. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can also check me out on the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Monday through Friday, breaking things down. I have a lot of different things that you can check me out on, as always, here. And as always, I remind people, I got my start with Jeff back in the Behind the Steel Curtain days. So it's been a long journey and a fun journey that I continue to enjoy.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you taking the time. We'll talk again soon. Take it easy.
Absolutely.